Trump's tariffs on Europe, a brief overview. During his presidency, Donald Trump initiated a series of tariff impositions on goods imported from various regions, including a significant focus on the European Union. These actions were primarily driven by his America First policy, aiming to protect American industries, reduce trade deficits, and compel trading partners to negotiate what he considered fairer trade deals. The rationale, from the U.S. perspective: the Trump administration argued that European trade practices were unfair and contributed to an imbalanced trade relationship. Specific grievances included trade deficit. The U.S. consistently ran a trade deficit with the EU, which Trump viewed as a sign of unfair trade. Subsidies. Allegations were made regarding European subsidies, particularly in the aerospace sector, e.g. Airbus, which the U.S. claimed harmed American competitors, e.g. Boeing. Regulatory barriers. The U.S. contended that certain European regulations acted as non-tariff barriers, making it difficult for American products to enter the European market. National security. In some instances, tariffs were justified under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, claiming that imports of steel and aluminum posed a threat to U.S. national security. This was a highly controversial application of the law, as allies like Europe were not typically considered national security threats. Key tariff actions. Steel and aluminum tariffs, 2018. This was one of the earliest and most impactful actions. Under Section 232, the U.S. imposed 25% tariffs on steel imports and 10% on aluminum imports from most countries, including EU member states. Aerospace tariffs, 2019. Following a World Trade Organization (WTO) ruling that found the EU provided illegal subsidies to Airbus, the US imposed tariffs on a range of European goods, including aircraft, wine, cheese, and olives. The EU retaliated after a similar WTO ruling against US subsidies to Boeing. Automobile tariffs threatened. Trump frequently threatened to impose significant tariffs, up to 25%, on European automobile imports, arguing they threatened US national security and competitiveness. While these tariffs were never fully implemented against the EU, the threat created considerable uncertainty and concern within the European automotive industry. Digital services taxes threatened, as several European countries moved to implement digital services taxes targeting large tech companies, many of which are American. The Trump administration threatened retaliatory tariffs on various European goods. European reaction and retaliation. The EU strongly condemned the U.S. tariffs, viewing them as protectionist, illegal under WTO rules, and damaging to global trade. In response, the EU typically filed WTO complaints. The EU challenged the legality of the U.S. tariffs at the World Trade Organization, often with mixed results and lengthy processes. Imposed retaliatory tariffs. The EU retaliated by imposing its own tariffs on a range of American products, often targeting politically sensitive goods from key U.S. states, e.g. Harley-Davidson motorcycles, bourbon whiskey, Levi's jeans. The aim was to pressure the U.S. to lift its tariffs. Sought negotiations. Despite the tit-for-tat tariffs, both sides engaged in periods of negotiation, though often with limited breakthroughs under the Trump administration. Consequences and impact. Increased costs. Tariffs increased costs for both consumers and businesses as imported goods became more expensive. Disruption to supply chains. Businesses faced uncertainty and had to reevaluate their supply chains. Reduced trade volumes. The tariffs contributed to a slowdown in trade between the U.S. and Europe. Economic uncertainty. The constant threat of new tariffs created a climate of economic uncertainty for businesses and investors. Strained transatlantic relations. The trade disputes significantly strained the traditionally strong economic and political relationship between the U.S. and the EU. They highlighted a divergence in approaches to global trade and multilateral institutions like the WTO. WTO effectiveness questions. The tariff disputes, with both sides often claiming WTO justification while simultaneously imposing unilateral measures, raised questions about the effectiveness and enforcement power of the World Trade Organization. Conclusion. The period under the Trump administration saw a significant shift in U.S. trade policy towards Europe, characterized by the frequent use of tariffs as a tool for negotiation and protection. While the stated aim was to achieve fairer trade, the immediate impact was often increased costs, trade disruption, and a notable deterioration in transatlantic relations. Many of these trade tensions persisted until the change in U.S. administration, with the Biden administration taking a more collaborative, though still firm, approach to trade with Europe. Unpacking Trump's tariffs: why the U.S. turned on Europe. During his presidency, Donald Trump's America First agenda manifested prominently in trade policy, leading to unprecedented tariff impositions on close allies, particularly the European Union. This shift wasn't arbitrary. It stemmed from a complex interplay of economic philosophy, political strategy, and deeply held beliefs about global trade. The America First doctrine and perceived unfairness. At the core of Trump's tariff offensive was his unwavering belief that the United States was being systematically exploited by its trading partners. He frequently decried what he saw as unfair trade deals that led to significant trade deficits, particularly with the EU. To him, a trade deficit wasn't merely an economic metric. It was proof that other nations were taking advantage of America. Trade deficit obsession. Trump viewed the persistent U.S. trade deficit with the EU as a direct consequence of imbalanced trade practices. He argued that European tariffs were higher than U.S. tariffs, and that various non-tariff barriers made it difficult for American goods to compete effectively in European markets. The deficit, in his eyes, represented lost American jobs and wealth flowing out of the country. Cheating allegations. Beyond just trade deficits, Trump often accused European nations of engaging in unfair trade practices, including currency manipulation, though this was rarely a direct accusation against the Eurozone, and illegal subsidies. The long-standing dispute over aircraft subsidies, where both the US, Boeing, and the EU, Airbus, were found by the WTO to have received illegal support, became a significant flashpoint. Trump used such rulings to justify retaliatory tariffs on a broader range of European goods, arguing the EU's subsidies gave its industries an unfair advantage. Protecting domestic industries. A key tenet of America First was the protection and revitalization of American manufacturing. Industries like steel and aluminum, which had faced fierce global competition for decades, were seen as critical to national security and economic independence. Trump utilized Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, an obscure law allowing tariffs on imports deemed a threat to national security, to impose duties on steel and aluminum from the EU, among others. While many economists and allies questioned the genuine national security threat posed by European steel, this legal avenue provided a broad justification for protectionist measures. Political strategy and leverage. Beyond economic ideology, Trump's tariff strategy also served significant political purposes, both domestically and internationally. Appealing to the base. For his political base, particularly in Rust Belt states that had experienced manufacturing job losses, Trump's tough stance on trade resonated deeply. His rhetoric, blaming foreign countries for American economic woes, played well with voters who felt left behind by globalization. Tariffs were presented as a concrete action to bring jobs back home and punish those taking advantage of the U.S. Forcing renegotiation. Trump viewed tariffs as a powerful negotiating tool, a lever to force trading partners to the table and secure what he considered better deals. His approach was often characterized by applying maximum pressure first, with the expectation that adversaries would eventually concede. This was evident in his repeated threats of auto tariffs on the EU. While never fully implemented, the mere threat was intended to compel concessions on other trade issues. He believed that imposing economic pain would lead to more favorable terms for the U.S. Challenging the status quo. Trump was openly critical of multilateral institutions like the World Trade Organization, WTO, viewing them as ineffective or even biased against the U.S. His unilateral imposition of tariffs, often bypassing or challenging WTO norms, was a deliberate effort to assert U.S. sovereignty in trade matters and reshape the global trading system according to his vision, rather than adhering to existing international frameworks. He sought to dismantle what he perceived as a globalist consensus that he felt disadvantaged America. Deeper economic currents and globalization backlash. While Trump's personality and specific policies were unique, his trade actions also tapped into broader currents of discontent with globalization. Job displacement concerns. For decades, many industrialized nations, including the US, have grappled with the economic consequences of globalization, including the outsourcing of manufacturing jobs and increased competition from lower-wage economies. While economists generally attribute job losses more to automation and technological change than solely to trade, the perception among many workers was that imports were directly responsible for their hardship. Trump effectively capitalized on this sentiment. Skepticism of free trade. While traditionally a bipartisan consensus in the US, the concept of unfettered free trade had faced growing skepticism from both the political left and right. Concerns about environmental standards, labor rights, and the concentration of wealth spurred a reconsideration of traditional trade agreements. Trump's arguments, though often simplistic, resonated with a segment of the population that felt free trade had not delivered on its promises. In essence, Trump's tariffs on Europe were not just isolated economic measures. They were a manifestation of a distinct America First ideology, a calculated political strategy to appeal to a specific voter base, and a forceful attempt to reconfigure global trade dynamics based on a deep-seated conviction that the US had been treated unfairly for too long. The lingering echoes, predicting the fallout from Trump's tariffs on Europe. While the immediate shockwaves of President Donald Trump's trade wars with Europe have subsided, their long-term repercussions continue to ripple through the transatlantic relationship and the global economy. Predicting the exact future is a fool's errand, but several key areas are likely to bear the lasting marks of that contentious period. Enduring distrust and strained alliances. Perhaps the most significant and insidious fallout is the erosion of trust between the United States and its traditional European allies. For decades, the transatlantic bond was seen as the bedrock of the liberal international order, built on shared values and mutual defense. Trump's tariffs, however, treated these allies as economic adversaries, raising fundamental questions about the reliability of the US as a trade partner. Even under the Biden administration, which has sought to mend fences, a lingering sense of vulnerability persists in Europe. There's a heightened awareness that future US administrations could, once again, resort to unilateral protectionism. This apprehension could manifest in several ways. Diversification of trade partners. European nations may increasingly prioritize diversifying their supply chains and trade relationships, looking beyond the US, to regions like Asia, Latin America, or even within the EU itself, to reduce their dependence on a potentially unpredictable US market. Strengthening EU autonomy. The tariffs acted as a wake-up call for the European Union to enhance its own economic and strategic autonomy. This could accelerate efforts to strengthen internal markets, develop independent technological capabilities, and fortify its position as a global economic bloc, even if it sometimes diverges from US interests. Challenges to collective action. While cooperation on geopolitical issues will likely continue, the trade disputes could make future collective action on global economic challenges more difficult. The memory of being targeted economically might make European leaders more hesitant to fully align with US economic initiatives. A more fragile global trading system. Trump's America First trade policies, including the tariffs on Europe, significantly weakened the multilateral trading system centered around the World Trade Organization, WTO. By frequently sidestepping WTO dispute resolution mechanisms and imposing tariffs unilaterally, the US effectively undermined the very rules it helped create. The consequences for global trade governance are profound. Increased bilateralism and regionalism. Expect to see a continued shift towards bilateral and regional trade agreements, as countries seek more predictable and less volatile trading relationships outside the broader and now more fragile WTO framework. This could lead to a fragmented global trade landscape with a patchwork of rules and standards, increasing complexity for businesses. Weakened WTO enforcement. The precedent set by the US could embolden other powerful nations to also disregard WTO rulings or resort to unilateral measures when disputes arise. This erodes the WTO's authority and its ability to act as an impartial arbiter, making future trade disputes harder to resolve peacefully and legally. Rise of economic nationalism. The appeal of protectionist measures, once considered an outlier in mainstream economic policy, gained significant traction during the Trump era. This could inspire other nations to adopt similar tit-for-tat tariff strategies, leading to more frequent trade wars and a general increase in economic nationalism around the globe, hindering global economic growth. Lingering economic distortions. While some tariffs have been lifted or suspended, the economic distortions they created won't simply vanish. Supply chain resilience versus efficiency. Businesses learned painful lessons about relying on single-source suppliers and optimized global supply chains that were vulnerable to political whims. The push for supply chain resilience, bringing production closer to home or diversifying sources, will likely continue, even if it means sacrificing some cost efficiency. This de-risking could lead to higher production costs and potentially higher consumer prices in the long run. Sector-specific scars. Industries directly targeted, such as European steel, aluminum, wine, and certain luxury goods, experienced significant disruptions. While some may have adapted, others might have permanently lost market share or faced irreversible changes. The automotive sector, though largely spared from major tariffs, still remembers the constant threat, which likely influenced investment decisions and strategic planning. Investment hesitancy. The unpredictability of trade policy under Trump might make businesses more cautious about long-term investments that rely on stable international trade. Uncertainty is anathema to investment, and the memories of abrupt policy shifts could continue to deter cross-border capital flows. In summary, Trump's tariffs on Europe weren't just a temporary trade spat. They marked a paradigm shift in global trade relations. Their fallout will likely be felt for years to come, manifesting in strained alliances, a more fragmented global trading system, and enduring economic adjustments as the world grapples with the new realities of trade in an era shaped by nationalism and protectionism. Navigating the aftermath, solutions, and citizen resilience in the face of trade tensions. The era of transatlantic trade hostilities under President Donald Trump, marked by tariffs and threats, has left a complex legacy. While direct tariff clashes have eased, the underlying issues and the potential for future friction remain. Both the United States and the European Union have been compelled to devise strategies to mitigate past damage and fortify themselves against future economic disputes. Crucially, the onus isn't solely on governments. Citizens in both regions also have vital roles to play in fostering resilience. Governmental solutions, repairing and reinforcing. Both Washington and Brussels have taken steps to move beyond the tariff wars, but their approaches are often distinct, reflecting their respective political and economic philosophies. For the United States, the Biden administration has largely adopted a more collaborative, though still assertive, approach to trade. Re-engagement with allies. A primary solution has been to re-engage with traditional allies, including the EU. This involves dialogue, joint statements, and efforts to resolve outstanding trade irritants through negotiation rather than unilateral action. The suspension of several Trump-era tariffs, particularly those related to the Airbus-Boeing dispute, is a prime example. Targeted enforcement. While shying away from broad sweeping tariffs, the U.S. continues to pursue targeted enforcement actions against what it perceives as unfair trade practices, often working with allies. This includes addressing issues like subsidies and intellectual property theft, but ideally through multilateral channels or carefully crafted agreements. Domestic investment. The U.S. is increasingly focusing on domestic investment in key industries like semiconductors and clean energy. The aim is to reduce reliance on foreign supply chains, thereby lessening vulnerability to global disruptions and bolstering national security, an underlying rationale often cited during the tariff era. This move is seen as a way to create jobs and strengthen the industrial base without necessarily resorting to tariffs on allies. WTO reform efforts. While past administrations might have criticized the WTO, the current U.S. approach involves attempting to reform and revitalize the organization, recognizing its importance for a stable global trading system, even if progress is slow. For the European Union, the EU, having felt the direct impact of U.S. tariffs, has significantly accelerated its efforts to bolster its own strategic autonomy. Strengthening internal market and resilience. The EU is committed to deepening its internal market and strengthening its supply chain resilience. This means identifying critical dependencies, promoting domestic production where viable, and diversifying sources for essential goods. The pandemic further underscored this need, but the trade wars provided an earlier impetus. Diversifying trade partnerships. Europe is actively pursuing and concluding new trade agreements with other regions, such as Latin America, Asia, and Africa. This strategy aims to reduce over-reliance on any single trading partner, including the US, and create alternative markets for European goods and services. Developing defensive trade tools. The EU is also creating and refining its own defensive trade instruments. This includes anti-coercion tools designed to counter economic pressure from third countries, and new legislation to address foreign subsidies that distort its internal market. These tools are a direct response to the perceived vulnerabilities exposed by the Trump administration's tactics. Asserting multilateralism. The EU remains a staunch advocate for the multilateral trading system and the WTO. It actively works to uphold and strengthen international trade rules, viewing them as essential for predictable and fair global commerce. What citizens in the US and EU can do to cope. While trade policies are set at the governmental level, individuals and communities are not powerless. Their actions can contribute to resilience and shape future responses. For US citizens, support local and diverse businesses. When purchasing goods, consider supporting local businesses or those that have diversified their supply chains. This helps build local economic resilience and reduces susceptibility to global trade shocks. Stay informed and engaged. Understand how trade policies affect everyday life. Follow reputable news sources, engage in civic discussions, and communicate with elected officials about the importance of stable, fair, and predictable trade relations. Advocate for predictable policy. Encourage policymakers to prioritize long-term economic stability over short-term political gains from aggressive trade tactics. Supporting leaders who champion clear and consistent trade rules can help prevent future arbitrary tariffs. Embrace skill development. In an evolving global economy, continuous learning and skill development are crucial. Jobs and industries can shift due to trade and technological changes. Adapting to new demands helps individuals remain competitive. For EU citizens, prioritize sustainable and ethical consumption. Look for products that are produced locally or regionally within the EU, or those from diverse, reliable international sources. Consider the ethical implications and sustainability of supply chains, which can often be more robust. Demand transparency and accountability. Urge elected representatives to advocate for transparent trade negotiations and to hold trading partners accountable to international rules. Understanding the complexities of EU trade policy can empower citizens to make informed choices. Support EU integration. Recognizing the strength that comes from collective action, citizens can support policies that deepen EU economic integration and enhance the bloc's ability to act cohesively on the global stage. A stronger, more unified EU is better equipped to withstand external economic pressures. Invest in future-proof industries. Encourage investment in innovative and future-proof industries within the EU, such as renewable energy, digital technologies, and advanced manufacturing. This helps build a resilient economy less susceptible to traditional trade disputes. In conclusion, the era of Trump's tariffs served as a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of the global economy and the fragility of long-standing alliances. While governments in the US and EU are implementing solutions to repair and reinforce their economic defenses, the active engagement of citizens, through informed consumption, civic participation, and support for resilient economic models, is equally vital in navigating the complex trade landscape ahead.